Good evening. You're listening to the Xtreme Movie Show. Tonight's episode, Xtreme TV. We are covering Twin Peaks Season 2, Episode 2 of one of the best TV shows of all time. I'm your host, Rob. I'm here with Twin Pixels, a.k.a. Professor Pixel. Good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm good. I am hyped up. You say best shows of all time. It's also one of the weirdest shows of all time.
And a lot of people like the David Lynch thing because they feel like he trolls them and adds crap you don't need, and there's an element of truth to that. And right now, I don't care because it doesn't bother me. But if I were doing a quick rundown, dirty description of this episode after the great Season 2, Episode 1 extra double length feature that we had last week, this one picks off with some great stuff. There's a lot of kookiness in this episode, and I refer to this as the cream corn episode. And everybody who knows the show will know exactly what I'm talking about. Anybody that doesn't, when you get up to this point, you will know exactly what it means, because it's actually one of the darkest scenes in this episode to me. So why don't you go ahead and start off, Twin Pixels, with the opening scene and what's going on?
Well, actually, it's funny you mentioned the opening, because in this episode, we do not have that dark turn that we got at the start of the previous episode.
Correct.
The title sequence seems to be back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose the thought of looming death doesn't need to be there. But we start off with our favorite, one Agent Cooper, and Albert. I can't remember his last name, but he's kind of just an ass.
Yep.
And Dale is trying to do what he did in the first season. He's relating situations that are happening to tying it into other religions in places out far sorry, I'm rambling on.
Buddhist philosophy.
Yes.
What he had went through before with the what did we call that episode? The rock throwing episode.
Yes.
With the bottles. Yeah.
And unlike Harry and basically the rest of the sheriff's office, Albert is just staring at him. He's like, I do not care. But Dale then tells Albert, you'll be surprised how things are connected. And then announces that Ronette has awoken from her coma. There's a lot of information dumping in this opening, which I appreciate, because back when this was coming out, most television was watched when it was on. So in each episode, rather than having a previously on Twin Peaks, they just keep the information passing in the show, and it unlike some shows, it doesn't feel heavy-handed in a way. It just feels natural. It's a part of it. Some new information is that no one has seemed to see Bob, which I believe is the shoe salesman.
The shoe salesman guy is the one-armed man. That's Philip Gerard.
Oh, isn't it?
Right. Bob is the name of the picture that Sarah Palmer saw in her dreams, and I think Maddie had seen another time too. And that's something that we'll be talking about here in a few more scenes.
Okay, my bad.
But they mentioned Bob because nobody's seen Bob, nobody knows who this Bob is, and so Bob seems to be the only suspect because Leo's in the hospital.
Well, there's also a bit of information that we get from Albert. Wyndham Earl has gone missing. It's heavily implied that he's been locked up in like a psychiatric ward.
Yes.
Because the job basically drove him to it. But he used to be Dale's former partner.
Yes.
And then the last thing we see of this scene is a slow pan away from them and this barbershop quartet that's just doing this tune behind them the entire time. I can't believe I almost forgot about them.
Well, they're humming too. You can hear the right, and they're smoking cigarettes too, which I thought was interesting. Yeah.
But we pan to the uh, the Asian man that placed a phone call last time asking for Josie, and he is directly watching Agent Cooper.
Yeah, yeah. So we're planting the seeds here for these things to draw out over a much longer season. So I'm curious how that's going to go, because obviously Cooper's partner, Wyndham Earl, the one that was institutionalized, is going to come in a factor somehow, just because the look on his face. And that's one of the things, I kind of didn't really give Kyle MacLachlan a lot of credit for acting in Cooper's role, but he loves the role. But he acts a lot with, I think, thinking what the emotion should be, and you can see it cross along the lines of his face and his eyes. And that's something that I've been watching a bit for too. Obviously, when he's enthusiastic, it's easier to spot, but something like this I thought was a good scene. Now, that's kind of a little silly. It's a little whatever with the barbershop quartet in the back there humming along to a tune. But what I like here, and we've talked about this before, one of the ways the show seems to work is they'll give you a goofy thing, then followed you by a serious thing, then followed you by something else. And it's, kind of like, I'm pull you in this direction, then this direction, then this direction. And so sometimes that makes it very effective, because in the next scene, we know that Donna was taking over Laura's Meals on Wheels program too, to try to find out some information about stuff. So she goes to see like this older lady that she's bedridden. She knocks on a door, and of course the music changes, so there's just that like one or two note going on, and she's like, "You can come in," and she's real sickly, coughing, and she puts the food down. And what's weird about this is they cut to where she's getting ready to give the food to the older lady. There's this kid, and I don't know if he's like 8-10 years old or like that, but he looks like Mini Dale, kind of, sort of, or Mini Lynch himself, because he's got like this tux looking thing on, and he's just sitting there with his hands there and looking really proper. And he doesn't see nothing, but he has a real menacing look on his face. It sounds weird, but he doesn't say anything. And she opens up the food thing, and the lady starts bitching about, cream corn, because it was kind of like we were popping last week with the really bad food from the hospital, and here we got, it looks like hospital food, but she's like, "I wish the cream corn would disappear," something like that. And she looks down and she doesn't see the cream corn.
Well,
And then you turn around to the kid, and he's got it in his hands. So she's like, "Oh, my grandson's studying magic." And it's like, okay, this is just really weird and stupid, and it shouldn't be this creepy, but it is. And I give Donna a little bit of flack because she's hanging around the worst character in the entire show, which we'll get to at the end of the episode. But I do like her. I like her when she's investigating. She's got kind of this boring energy, but it's a legitimate energy, I guess, and all that. But the interesting thing is that she gets information that the lady says, "Well, maybe you should check the guy next door. He was friends with Laura," is what the lady says. Because when she'd asked the lady about whether she really knew Laura, well, she pauses and turns aside, looks away, and says, "Oh, no." And, she's lying. So I don't know what's going on there, but we see that. The guy says some French stuff, Paris talk. She goes next door. Nobody answers. She leaves a little note under there. Mr. Smith, I think, is his name. What were you going to say?
Well, it's actually, you're a little right. It is definitely kooky, but just in how the boy is talking, because we don't even notice him until he says "Miss," and Donna takes a look and just sees this little boy in a suit. You're absolutely right. And he looks at her and says, "Sometimes things can happen just like this." He snaps, and then we get that cream corn scene where she's like, "I requested no cream corn. Do you see cream corn?" Donna looks. Yep, there's cream corn. And again, she says, "I requested no cream corn. Do you see it?" And she looks, and it's just gone. It's not, there's not even a residue of it on the plate. And then we see the boy holding it in his hands. Then he says something in French. And whenever she leaves the house, she goes to talk to the man next door. She knocks. And the way that the boy, and I'm guessing his grandmother, because she called him his grandson, or her grandson, that he says, "She seemed like a very nice girl." And that just feels so wrong.
Right. I agree with you. Yeah, that's ooh. Yeah, well, the next scene is a pretty quick scene. It kind of typifies what we were talking about with having something absurd or whatever. They're going to go see Ronette, who's the one saw in the first episode, first season, where she's walking across the train tracks and she's in that fugue type state, and she'd been kind of out of it the entire time for the most part. And here, Harry and Cooper are getting ready to sit down and show her some pictures and all that because she's supposedly ready to go. But they spend literally like a minute trying to figure out how to work their stools. And they're like, "I'm sorry" or whatever. But then they show the picture, and she totally freaks out when she sees the sketch of Bob, the long-haired kind of guy that we've seen, one or two, or whatever. That's pretty much it. But the reaction is really good and also kind of dark too. But then they cut to Ben and Jerry talking about how whether they should burn the fake ledger and all that. And what's weird about that is there's really not much in any of these scenes other than, of course, Ronette's very sensitive to the picture of Bob, so that apparently is the image we're going to be having to pay attention to here. It's where Ben and Jerry are debating about stuff, and at the end, Jerry says to Benny, he's like, "Marshmallows, get out them hickory sticks." And that's like one of the funniest lines I've seen lately, the way he delivers it. So stupid and bizarre. Unless you've got anything for the scene here, we can just go straight into the Double R Diner. I mean, unless I missed something. What do you think?
They're like overgrown children.
Yeah.
The entire time. And you want to know where all the time went in this episode? That moment in which Harry and Dale are just reading the instructions on how to change the seat height. It felt like, is this supposed to be here? But no, you're right. Or you're right. Going straight into the Double R Diner, we see Deputy Andy. Oh my gosh. How does this man live? Because he can't use tape. We see him as he's trying to hang up this picture of, have you seen this man? And it's the picture of Bob. And he's covered in little pieces of tape, and he's trying to get more. But the interesting thing that happens in this scene, rather than me just ranting on about Deputy Dumbass, is the Major is sitting at the bar, and Log Lady comes up and sits next to him. She doesn't talk to him for a good minute, but then she looks at him and says, "You wear shiny things on your chest," and tells him that her log has something to say to him. And the Major is being very respectful of the Log Lady. It's a little odd because this is the Log Lady we're talking about. But he really seems to be like, "No, ma'am. Yes, ma'am." And she tells him that her log says that he has a message to deliver, or deliver the message is what it says directly. And she asks, "Do you understand?" And the Major looks at her a moment, and he's like, "Ma'am, yes, I do."
Yeah, the exchange here is really incredible. I really love how Briggs talks, the way he communicates. It's very interesting. It's a fantastic bit of information going back and forth, because it makes me feel like there's a lot going on with the Long Lady living out by herself way out in the middle of nowhere, and this Major Briggs, whose character will expand here a little bit later in this episode. So we'll leave it at that. Yeah, it's a good quick scene. Establishes them, keeps them going, makes you think about the R. Obviously, Briggs is going to be more of a major player. We'll get more of the Log Lady. The next scene's not really too detailed because it's more of the Andy subplot there, where Lucy's giving him a cold shoulder, and he's basically saying, "Hey, I went to the sperm bank and I'm sterile, I can't baby, so how are you having one?" It's his nice way of trying to say, "Hey, what the hell's going on?" And I don't know if I like it now or hate it. It was kind of cute before. I don't know where it's going to go to, but it doesn't dwell on that too much because you get Hank having to do his little signing thing because he's on parole, and there's not much going on there. But the piece of information is Truman's telling Cooper that, hey, he used to be one of us, a bookhouse boy, one of the best ones that we've ever had, or something. So we know this is going to add some, because we've said before, this guy seems to be very, very smart, put together. And even though Ben might be the bad guy and the money behind it, this guy's the executor. He's the one that makes things happen. But Ben does call and he says, hey, look, Audrey's been missing for a couple of days. And I get the vibe from Ben that he really didn't care, but he had to do it to do it. It was just sort of weird too, because right after that we quickly get into where we're talking about, Ben and Jerry talking about the insurance policy. They're assuming Catherine's dead. What's going to happen? And I think the only purpose of this scene, and it felt kind of rushed to me, is because they're talking about who they're going to sell it to and how it's going to happen. But, Leland, he came in the room and he seems like he just wants to get back to work. And he's now kind of interjecting himself saying, hey, I did this. I let them know that I'm going to call or whatever. And it looks like Ben and Jerry kind of don't like it. But the only real thing of note to me, because I'm kind of, even though the mill angle is still going on, I'm not caring about it. I don't hate it, but it's just sort of there until Catherine comes back, because obviously to me, she's not dead. But it's Leland Palmer sees the sketch of Bob, the one you said that, like, Andy had been putting up everywhere. So they're posting all that. And he says, hey, I know this guy. He used to live next door to, my grandparents' house back at the lakes, or where like that when he was a little kid. And I thought that was kind of interesting, because Ben's basically then says, hey, did Jerry, he's asking Jerry, hey, why don't you go ahead and kill him, kill Leland. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. What was your take on those scenes?
Well, there's one important piece of information that we need to harken back to the sheriff's scene. After Harry tells Cooper that he used to be a bookhouse boy, one of the best, there's a call. He picks it up, and Ben is on the other line, and he's saying, oh, hey, Audrey's missing for about 2 days now. And honestly, Harry and Dale seem far more concerned with Audrey being missing than her father ever could.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And in that next scene, it's definitely interesting, because if he recognizes this man from his grandfather's summer house, and that man looked like that, how on earth is he still up and kicking?
I agree.
That's my main question. I feel like we're going to be asking that later. The next things that happen, Leo's alive, unfortunately, but he might be a vegetable. They don't really know anything at this point. They just say with time they'll see what happens. And
do you think people your age know what vegetable means when you talk about somebody that's got severe brain trauma? I'm not being sarcastic here, because that would be considered in poor taste to call somebody that today, wouldn't it?
I mean, it's not something they can help, but
well, he's not dead.
Yeah, I feel like no, they're saying there's a possibility that he's just brain dead. But they don't know anything yet. Shelley asks if they'll lock him away, but the doctor says there's no way to be sure about any of that. There's still information to pass around. There's another call for the sheriff, and Lucy is talking to them and says, I can't connect you to the sheriff if you don't say who you are. And the person keeps saying, I need to talk to the sheriff. We don't hear that. But we just hear Lucy say, "No, you won't tell me your identity. I can't connect you." And at one point, she just says, "I'm going to hang up now," and she does. And then we finally get back to. I feel like this scene is far more interesting out of him, but it's another partial info dump. One-Eye Jacks.
Yes, Audrey.
There's a person tied up, and his toenails are painted.
It's the guy that I disagreed with you on and then was proven wrong. It's the her boss, Mr. Battis. Yes, he's
Emery.
bound and gagged. Yeah, and painted. He's wanting to get the ice treatment from the ladies.
So there's this girl with a bucket of ice, and she is heading into that room. But Audrey, she comes up next to her and says, "Hey, let me take that. I can take over." And the girl originally is like, "You're sure about that? This one's a wild one." But she does give the bucket. Audrey goes in there, and there's this one that's vacuuming, and Audrey basically signals, "Hey, get out of here." And that's when she takes, after the girl's gone, she takes off the blindfold, and she uses the cord of the vacuum and wraps it around the guy's neck.
Yeah, she's not playing.
She's definitely in control of that situation. Basically, this is an information dump. It's confirming what we already knew. Laura, Ronette, they both worked for the perfume counter. Apparently, Laura was thrown out because she was using drugs.
Say no to drugs, especially when you're a prostitute.
Exactly. But other than that, it's just Audrey being awesome.
Yeah, Audrey's just being awesome Audrey. Yeah, not much going on there except for what'll happen in a moment when they cut back to it. And again, the one day, one episode type of theme seems to be going on here. We get a quick scene where one of the information pieces we got about Leah possibly being brain dead but still physically alive, of course, is that Bobby and Shelley are out there in the car park or whatever. They come up with this scheme idea which we know is going to backfire because they always do, about, well, hey, as long as Leo's alive and brain dead, he gets the disability check and we can just cash him. So they're kind of like, whatever. And then they make to look like they're going to have some sweet whoopee in the front seat of the car. I mean, it takes like a second. But the next scene, to me, is where this Twin Peaks show is turning into something else, because we mentioned before earlier on about Briggs and the log lady. Well, Cooper's at his place in a hotel, and he gets a knock on the door. He was talking to Diane about his boss's disappearance and all that. And he's like, "It's Mr. Briggs." Then he opens the door and he's like, "May I come in?" He's almost got a little Southern to him, or Texan or something. And he comes in and he talks about being involved in Deep Space Monitors, how he's not at liberty to really explain too much. Cooper recognizes that, being another man of the government. And he says that this message is for you. You know, we monitor what's called space garbage, but this isn't. And he's like, "Well, what's the message?" And the message is, "The owls are not what they seem." And he's like, "Well, how do you know it's for me?" And it says, "Because it says your name on here, Cooper," several times. And he points to it. And so they just kind of both stare at each other. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of badass. This is making it otherworldly.
Literally.
What you mentioned about the time factor with if Leland Palmer had saw this, what appears to be Bob, like that when he was a child and he's middle aged now, and this is the vision that people are seeing current day, how does somebody that looks like he's 40 to 50 years old, like this picture of Bob does, who should now be about 80, let's say, I don't know, and we'll see how that plays out. But your take on this scene quickly.
No, you're absolutely right. The way that they talk to each other, they're I'm enjoying every scene with the Major at this point. Just anytime that he's on the screen, there's something going on, and he is saying something worth listening to. The next scene,
I want to do this next scene because this is the worst scene in the entire whole series to me. Some of the best and worst in this episode here, because you got Maddie and the James gang, as I like to call them, with Donna, basically the three of them. They're recording a song, and I have no idea why the hell they're doing it, but it's so the two chicks can really say something, and he's staring at her or whatever. And of course, we know that Donna's losing, quote unquote, losing James, because James is never worth having anyway, and that Maddie's kind of getting all hooked up with James in a way, and she doesn't know why she's there. It's like a boo-hoo thing, but it doesn't matter because Donna basically gave her number to this freak weirdo dude living next to the cream corn lady, and it's just ridiculous. And then, of course, when James tries to comfort Donna, she runs off or whatever. And it's such a, I don't even like this scene at all. I'm so mad about it. But then they try to make up for it with Maddie, because we see Maddie having visions. She gets a vision of the same guy, Bob, kind of like crawling like from the kitchen over the thing right to her or whatever, and she screams or loud. That's kind of cool, but I cannot stand James at all. And I get that there's this love triangle and it's two ladies and a guy, which is interesting, but it'd be much more interesting if the girls were fighting over him or something. But this guy, I just cannot stand James at all. I'm done ranting. Go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right, because this stupid sappy love song that they keep singing. Oh my gosh, it was just like, why?
Put a bullet in this guy already. Take him off my screen.
Put the bullet in the guy, put the bullet in me, so that I don't have to listen to this. It was that bad. But whenever it's starting out, it is mostly James and Donna staring at it, while James is looking at her, whereas Donna is.
I think we see James looking.
Yeah, no, yeah.
But we don't know who. That's how I took it.
We do know definitely who, because after a moment, Maddie opens her eyes and looks to him, and then she keeps glancing over at him, and eventually she gets a full look, and then he looks at Maddie, and they're just staring. And Donna,
I almost feel bad for Donna, really, because she's not a bad girl. I know I kind of get on her a little bit for liking James, because James, if he wouldn't be such a wuss, seems like an okay guy, but he's not. I don't know. Screw it. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
She's not a bad girl. She's
a good girl.
Stupid in love. She runs away, and he tries to ask what's wrong, and she doesn't answer. She just says nothing's wrong. But a phone call comes for her from Harold Smith, Mr. Smith. And Donna goes and she answers the phone, and they set up a place to meet, but we don't hear anything from this guy. I remember mentioning how in the last episode of last season, the phone call with Jacoby, you could hear him on the other side even say little things like, wait, no, whenever he thought he was talking to Laura.
Mm-hmm.
But these phone calls with people we don't really know on the other side, they don't want to give anything away. So it's just a one-sided conversation. And then you're absolutely right. They try to make up for it with Maddie sitting there and then getting a vision of Bob crawling towards her, and she starts screaming and they run in, but it's all in her mind. And then we get
a lot better. Yeah.
The final scene of the episode, which is a wave of a hand. It's the giant again. The friendly neighborhood giant. You got it. Every neighborhood has to have one. We see Ronette freaking out like she did before, where she's saying "tra tra" and jerking her head. I'm pretty sure she was nodding at the word train car when Dale said it earlier. So
right, I agree with that.
Then we hear the giant saying about owls, and then the major saying about owls. And then we see Bob in his crouched position, and his face shifts into an owl. Laura's name is called, and we see a woman going down the stairs. I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be Laura's mother.
Mm-hmm.
And then the vision ends. There's a call. Cooper picks it up, and it's Audrey saying that she's been in serious trouble, but she's heading home now. And Cooper's relieved that Audrey's still alive, at least. But then Blackie hits the receiver, shuts off the call, and says to Audrey, "Trouble? You don't know what trouble is." And that's where the episode ends.
It's good stuff. It's really good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and the thing too is we've talked about before with the first shorts, season 1, if you want to call it that, including the double episode, the first one, the movie, almost basically is how I think of it. How we got a lot of characters introduced in almost every episode, how they left on a big cliffhanger, and this is going to the classic formula now. Start off with a quick information dump recap, but they do it in a way where it's obvious, but it's not as blatant as it is in current television, most current television. And then they end on some note where you go, okay, where were they going to end here? So that just is classic human nature. Leave you on a high note. It's that serialized notion of what would happen way back from the 20s and 30s and 40s. That's the way to do it, to keep people wanting to go back, because everybody's got a little bit of screen time, and their arc is going where they need to be. And Catherine Martell's not around, but we expect her to be showing up at some point because we haven't seen a body, and I just don't think she's dead, but we'll find out. But overall, again, fleshing out a bit more of what I would call the Twin Peaks universe, more so than the actual moving forward and what their direction is of Laura. So maybe we took 1 or 2 steps forward towards who this Bob person is, emphasis placed on the visual part of him, and his backstory with this time issue thing that we talked about, and also with Major Briggs, but then also a lot of all these other characters. So again, it's a little bit of something for everybody, where you may like some characters more than another, and you get a chance to kind of see how that goes through. And even someone like poor old boring Donna, who just isn't very watchable in terms of her character. She acts it fine, but now all of a sudden it's getting interesting when she's just by herself going next door, see Mr. Smith in a whole cream corn scene. It makes me want to watch her. Now I'm interested, invested into her to see what she's going to do, because all these people have a reason to try to figure out who killed Laura, and it's for their own reasons. And that's really, really good, rather than just saying, oh, we're gonna murder and hang the guy who did it. It's nothing like it. It's like, no, we all want to get there, and how are we going to do it? And again, it's only been a week or two, maybe. It's one day an episode, so we're talking 10 episodes now, whatever it's been. So a week and a half, and it does feel like a lot of stuff's happened, and it feels like it's still pretty close to when she passed, even though in real world terms, maybe 6 months has passed from the very viewing of the first episode till now. Final thoughts for you?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It feels like they've been there for almost a month, but it just sticks with you. The show is great. I love reviewing it every week. I'm interested to see where the next day goes. Obviously, we're going to get some answers as to, now that Blackie knows that Audrey is Audrey Horne, why the hell is she trying to keep her? Wouldn't her father be upset? But Blackie doesn't seem to be thinking about that. Or maybe she's trying to take it out on Ben himself, but we don't know. We're getting some connect. You're right. 2 steps forward with Bob. And we haven't really touched upon him a lot, even though he seems to be majorly involved in the death of Laura Palmer. I'm just excited to keep going, man. Honestly.
And going forward, as we shall, with episode 3 next week here on Xtreme TV. So for Twin Pixels and myself, Rob, aka Classic Cream Corn, for this episode here. Thanks for listening, everybody. There's very, very strong Twin Peaks contingent out there as far as tweeting and responding back. I really appreciate seeing that. There's some interesting things that they've done, which at some point I think we're going to start maybe integrating some thoughts with that too. We're trying to do this as a cold type of watch without really moving forward because Pixel's never really watched it. I have not rewatched season 2 since it came out 30 years ago. So to me, this is very, very interesting. And so we're trying to confine ourselves and be as fresh as we can, almost like an instant reaction for a 30-year-old plus show. Who'd have thought? Great stuff, Twin Peaks. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. For everybody involved here at the Extreme Movie Show, have a good night. Stay extreme.
So long.